Yeah, that works. Do you have all of these copied documents?
Yeah.
Okay, so get the powers of Congress, and when I say Congress, be careful. I don't mean today's Congress, so I'm not talking about the Senate and the House of Representatives, we're talking about the Continental Congress. I know I keep repeating that, but some of you will get confused at some point. You have to keep that straight. If we're talking before the year 1787, if you see Congress, we're talking Continental Congress. After 1787, and there's a really easy way to remember this, and I'll tell you in a second. After 1787, if you see Congress, we're talking about Senate, House of Representatives, and the bicameral legislative branch. George Washington is our first president. He takes over, he's elected president, and enters the White House in April of 1789. And the way, that's like when our new government officially starts. Our new government is rolling. The easiest way to remember is it's 1789. 1789. It's real easy. 1789. That is a landmark date in U.S. history. And so if you're before 1789, you're talking Articles of Confederation. If you're talking after 1789, you're talking current Constitution, current government, current federal structure. Yeah? The only way there's a little gray area is if technically the Articles of Confederation are scrapped in 1787. So there's a 2-year period where they're writing the Constitution and then ratifying the Constitution and trying to get everything underway. But for all intents and purposes, that's what we're talking about. All right, so we got that. I have this. Now, let's talk about this. Make war and peace. Clearly, why are they giving themselves this power? Safety. Yeah, I mean, this is Revolutionary War. Make treaties. You win the war or lose the war. We do not want Virginia making a separate treaty with Great Britain and Massachusetts making a separate treaty. That spells danger, because if Britain could make separate treaties with each state, all of a sudden now Britain can negotiate good relations with certain states, and then that gets really security.
Wait, didn't the Jefferson say that one of the colonies made separate?
Yeah, and so part of that is when they ratified the Articles of Confederation, right? They had that had to be addressed. Which colony it was that tried making Virginia? But for the most part, you do not want that happening. It's dangerous for the collective good of all the colonies. Think about it. It's a way to between the different states to borrow money and set up a money system. Notice it doesn't say to tax people. It says to borrow money, meaning they need to get money for the war. A lot of that money came from loans from Americans. Like, Luke, if you're a colonist living in Boston and you're supporting the revolutionary cause and you have a little extra cash, you could loan money to the government. You're hoping you get that money back. We also took loans from other foreign countries like France. Yeah?
What was the first tax that all the colonies agreed on? Because that didn't find it going back to Britain.
So, if we're talking about taxation and the colonies, I want you to keep in mind that the colonies themselves were asked by the Continental Congress for money. It's almost like an optional tax. Would you like to pay the 6% sales tax when you check out? Right? But official taxes that we're talking about, as far as you have to pay in taxing citizens, is not going to happen until after the Constitutional Convention, and I'm going to hold off onto that until we get there. Okay? Build an army, build a navy, settle disputes between states. This one, we're going to see, didn't necessarily play out as well as they hoped it would. Set standards of weights and measures. We joked about this yesterday and said, why is that a big deal? But you could see that trading becomes more difficult if you're not measuring what you're trading in the same units. Yeah?
During the 2-year period before the Constitution was ratified, what did they follow?
Oh, good question. So in the 2 years between the Articles of Confederation being scrapped and the Constitution being ratified, what did they use? Until the day the Constitution was ratified, they're under the Articles of Confederation. And even while they were drafting the Constitution, which most people don't know this, it was secretive. No one really knew what was going on. They didn't know. They knew that there was a meeting to discuss the Articles of Confederation, but the general public had no idea that they were creating a brand new document. It was like a gigantic surprise when that happened. And George Washington, who was actually going to be leading the discussions at the Constitutional Convention, he was like intense about the secrecy. They met in the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia. It is one of the hottest summers on record. Are in the high 90s, 100 degrees, and I don't know if you've ever been to Philadelphia, but it's muggy there. It's like that thick, wet, hot, not the dry, nice heat. You know what I'm talking about? The humidity, you're just like, and these people are dressed in nice formal clothes. Washington made them shut all the windows. There's no going. I mean, this is just sweating it out. And I think it's really, if you look at the Constitution, right? If you take a look at the Constitution,
Sweat blotches.
it's not. It lays out. It does, the legislative branch. So the first one they worked on was the legislative branch. If you look at Article 1, it is like pretty complete, pretty long. It's probably 10 or 12 pages if we go through that little pocket one I have. You get to Article 2, which is the president. Now they've been in Philadelphia for like 3 weeks to a month. Article 2, they're like hammered through that, and Article 2 is about that long. You get to Article 3, which is the Supreme Court. Now they've been there for like 2 months. Article 3, if you look at the Supreme Court, it's like, it's very vague. And then finally they're arguing about what exactly the Supreme Court's going to look like. And Washington finally says, like, we'll figure it out once we pass it, I promise. We'll figure it out. And so it's like kind of an incomplete, but they really got the two major parts, what the president's going to look like, what the legislative branch is going to look like, and then the rest, they're like, we'll work the kinks out. And at the very end, the people who were more conservative, the ones that wanted less power, they were really worried. They wanted a Bill of Rights. They wanted a set list of rights that citizens would have that the national government or the federal government would never infringe upon. And Washington basically says, there's no way we're going to agree to this right now. We're in jeopardy of losing all the work we did because people are getting angry and hot and disagreeing with each other. And so he said, I promise the very first thing that we will work on as a new government is drafting up a list of Bill of Rights. And that they did. By 1791, 2 years later, they draft a Bill of Rights and it's ratified. So, I mean, that's a lot of faith to put in a leader. And it's no coincidence that Washington was elected unanimously as president, as the first president. He was a very influential figure. There's a pretty cool story at the Constitutional Convention. Washington said, if you're taking notes on what we're doing, you got to keep them secretive. No publishing them in newspapers. No bringing them back to the delegates and to your state legislative branches. You keep them here. And someone after one of the meetings, Washington was walking out of what's today called Independence Hall, and found someone's notes from the day's proceedings, like on the floor. And the next day, as delegates are coming in, Washington is just silent, and on the front table, he just has the person's notes sitting there. And everyone was just, like, terrified. They're all checking their pockets, like, were they my notes? And one of the delegates wrote a letter and said that he didn't have his notes on him, and was so terrified, he refused to go up and get them, because he didn't want to take the verbal lashing from Washington, because he knew that it was a big deal. And so it was this very secretive process, really secretive process. Yeah.
Like, why was it so secretive? Like, what was the reason?
Because here's the thing: the Revolutionary War has just ended. On in the country. The deal is, if people know that these 50 guys, or no, it's more than 50 guys. How many? There's 80-something delegates at the Constitutional Convention. If these people are getting to create the Constitution that the entire country is going to live by for, the rest of, we're 200 plus years in and we're still living by it, think about how many people would have rushed to get their say, or how many people would have been up in arms about the fact that this was going on. Who gave them the power to create a Constitution? Where does that power come? And so they knew it was a pretty controversial thing they were doing, but, if it's controversial and no one knows about it, it's less controversial until you finish doing what you're doing, and then you have a pretty tough sell. Other questions? All right. So, going on, powers of Congress. Here are the weaknesses. This is brand new. I have it in quotes because this is one of the first things the Articles of Confederation says. It is the states, again, we're going back to the Articles of Confederation, not the current Constitution. The states agree only to a, quote, firm league of friendship. Doesn't that sound nice and fluffy? Like, we're just going to be one firm league of friends, which I think is really ironic because they're meeting in oh no, this wasn't in Philadelphia. But when I think of this, it reminds me of the Quakers, who are the religious society of friends. That's like about as up there with fluffy as it gets. One vote per state, regardless of size. And the reason I said that's a weakness is because it doesn't accurately reflect populations of different states. Congress was powerless to tax. You could make a side note to say they could request taxes, but they couldn't force states to pay taxes. Congress was powerless to regulate commerce. Commerce, by the way, I think a lot of you have seen that word. We're talking about trade. Commerce is trade. Commercial activities. Here's a reason. So, I'm trying to think of a good example. I can tell you generally. Hold on 1 second. If one state has an oversupply of military uniforms, let's say one state just happens to have an oversupply of military uniforms, and another state has a militia that they don't have any money to pay for uniforms, and they want to buy uniforms off each other. States were, that's a terrible example. That's a terrible example. Let's scratch that example. States were intentionally creating trade barriers so that it made it that it hurt other states but would help their state. If I assigned something, right? If I assigned an assignment to you in class, had your tablets, like Alex has got her tablet out right now, and I said, oh, by the way, you could use the internet to look stuff up, but only 3 of you have it. Do you agree that it would benefit the class as a whole if she used it for a little bit and then let everyone else have a turn and we shared the tablets together? Collectively, it helps us all get the assignment done quicker. Otherwise, she's just doing it and you're working on your own. But if she makes a rule, right, that says, like, guess what, I'm the only person that can use my tablet. Screw you, rest of the class. That's bad for the collective. It's good for you as an individual, bad for the collective. Same thing with trade. Like, states were making laws that benefited themselves. Like, maybe I'm negotiating a trade with France and I broker a really good deal. It helps my state, but it hurts other states on a whole. So if you can regulate commerce, if the federal government has the ability to regulate commerce, it helps keep economic activity more flowing evenly throughout the states and helps everyone collectively. I don't think I gave you a great example, and I'd have to sit and think about another example, but do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, it's a unity thing. Absolutely. Absolutely. No executive branch, no judicial branch. Amendments. If they wanted to change the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states had to agree. Yeah.
So does that mean Vermont was in it at this time?
No. Vermont is not a state at this time. So I can give it, you ready? Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut. Someone keep count for me. So Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, North Carolina. Did I say Virginia? Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia.
That's 14.
You said Virginia.
Oh yeah, Maine isn't a state. Scratch Maine. Let me do this again. New Hampshire. So Maine and Vermont are both not states. It's New Hampshire, and I did it all. So scratch Maine, all the others. Yes, I could do it. I just did it. Just added Maine. All right.
With the capitals?
With the capitals. I can do that too. That's why they pay me the big bucks. It's not that I don't know the states, it's just I can't do the math to count 13, that's all. Problems. All right, so pass laws. Even to just pass, it took nothing, like a 50, but well, what is that percentage? I don't know, like 65? 60-something percent? I mean, trust me, if today, in our legislative branch, if it there's like nothing ever gets done, and it's so hard for, they can't even agree to fund themselves, and we have this government shut. I can't even go enjoy, national. Did you hear about? Well, think about it was harder to get things. Frustrating we would be. Yeah.
So like, what was the purpose of shutting down the government? Like, how would that help anything?
It didn't. It just was a disagreement between the political parties, and there's fault to go around on both sides, both fault for Democrats, fault for Republicans, or fault of Republicans and Democrats. They were both trying to hold their ground to get what they wanted, and they held their ground so long. It's like a game of chicken, right? And the whole goal of a game of chicken is to stay your ground longest until the other person, backs down. Well, the government shut down. That's like two people running into each other and being knocked out for a little while playing the game of chicken. Our government was knocked out while they were playing chicken.
Why can't they?
Why can they do that?
I mean, shut down the government.
Well, because it's not like it's not that they closed the doors. It's not like they locked it and said, we're going to lock you out. I mean, they just had, the shutdown means they're not funding the government program. There's no money to fund. So I'll give you an example of the government shutdown. I could go to Yosemite National Park during the shutdown. There's no paychecks going to those park rangers that are being paid by the federal government. So they closed down the park because there was no rangers to ensure park safety, and so it's effectively shut down. Other government services, they were worried about like paychecks to government employees weren't going to be able to go out because the money wasn't there to fund it. So the government only funds itself in little bits at a time. Do you see why it would be really dangerous if the government funded itself and set aside money for 10 years right now? We don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. Think about what's going to happen in 6 months. We can barely tell. So they fund themselves in little increments at a time because it's safer to do that. Except for when they can't agree on what they're funding and then they shut down. So, all right, this is what the states promised to do. And you might not need to write down all of these. This should seem logical. States make promises. One, they promise to obey. Well, you hope so. They're ratifying them. Okay? So I probably don't need to write that down, but maybe you want to. They agree to send money and troops when Congress requests it. They agree to send money and troops when Congress requests it. They agree to respect the laws of other states. They didn't, but they promise. Listen, if this state has so-and-so law, we'll abide by it. It's like fingers crossed as they're promising, right? Allow open trade among states. We just talked about that. This didn't happen. But they promised. And in return for their promises, all powers. So if the power is not listed here, and there's a couple more that are pretty insignificant, these are the ones I want you to know. They agree to do these things, and they keep all the other powers. We're getting close. You guys are going to have like a page of reading tonight for homework. But you don't have another chapter to read till Wednesday, so. Is that what the next one's do?
Yeah.
I'll get the vocab up on plus portals for you guys too. So, states promise this. Are we good to move on?
Same.
This will be on plus portals as well. So, here's where problems start happening. After the Revolutionary War, states stopped holding up to the end of their bargain. Again, you probably don't need to write all these down. They refused to supply money and troops. States were making individual treaties with other countries, and this is what you were talking about, Val. Things that we were worried about are happening. Raising their own military forces when they're refusing to supply military forces for the collective good of the country. Taxing and banning goods from other states. So if we go back to the analogy of Alex using her tablet in here. I say, okay, there's an assignment where you can use the internet. Now all of a sudden she gets a better idea. Instead of saying, I can use it but none of you can, she said, I'm going to let you use it, but it's going to cost you $1. Now she's making money. That hurts your wallets or your ability to, pay for things. Same thing was happening with states. Printed their own money. And you read about this in the first case study, about how states were printing their own money. So now you have continental dollars, you have state bucks, you have British counterfeit bucks. Chaos. Not chaos, but bad times. Questions on this? Pretty straightforward, right? And Now, we're going to get to specific examples where you can see these problems playing out. So this is general statements. Statements, statements. This is actual concrete facts. This is the structure of it. These are concrete facts. Statements, statements. I want to talk about the case study, Shays Rebellion and Western Lands. Let's start with Shays Rebellion. We get out 54?
Yes.
Can we start reading it? All I want you to do is to finish reading tonight. It's really not a lot here. We have a dismissal. We have a backwards schedule. Right?
No, it was 11 and 11.
Yeah. I would like you to read this and finish filling out the chart. We're going to discuss this tomorrow. I would like to come in. My goal, we're to have a little discussion and clear up questions about all of these case studies, the 4. So if you have questions about some of the other ones.
Wait, Agnes here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is that extra? Good. Board is going to be online.